record. So now, this one going and we'll be off to the races. Tonight we're talking about relationship building is one component of what we're talking about, and we're looking at it from a couple of different points of view, and we're also talking about completing some conversations that we started on problem solving. And so we will cover those two topics. Looks like we're coming up to speed. We have a couple things that I wanted to kind of iterate. First 15 minutes really will be on this. One, I mentioned Griggs versus Duke Power, and didn't think we had time for the video, and then I kind of don't think we have time not to watch the video. And so I think, because this is a throwback in time to a different place in time that most of you are too young to even imagine that it was this way, and yet it was, and it's the basis for an awful lot of labor laws from this era. And those labor laws are maybe silly sometimes to us when we look at them without the filter of what's going on and kind of where we've come from. And I don't want us to lose track of that as individuals, as managers, as a country. I don't want us to lose track of that. Very easy for us to step forward and then step backwards, and I don't want us to do that. I don't think that's the spirit of what we've sacrificed in a lot of cases to accomplish. So I'm going to take a look at Griggs versus Duke Power. It's a 7-minute look at it from a legal point of view, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about employee selection based on the Griggs versus Duke Power plus a couple of other laws in terms of things we need to know when we are in the hiring mode. And all of us, HR departments are quote responsible for hiring, but most of the time they don't do the hiring. Most of the time what they do is giving you that paperwork and ask you what kind of insurance you want and a couple of things like that. And that is a limited HR department, not doing as much as they are capable and empowered or to be empowered to do. That's usually reflected on senior management. But it is what it is, and an HR team could really help us a lot in the selection process, the recruitment process in the company, instead of the boss just going, how come you're 2 guys short? And you go, well, we pissed 2 people off yesterday and they left. They didn't show today. And it's kind of the boss's fault. But, it comes back on us, right? And now we're short-handed, and HR is just waiting for us to, hand them an application and say, okay, I hired this guy. And that's loose and dangerous for a company. We don't really want to do that. We don't have to. So let's start out with Griggs versus Duke Power, and then we'll move up from there. Not sure if we got sound going on this thing.
Our company said.
We've got sound, I just have to wait for it, so. I think that all of you are not in a spot where you can read that. Willie Griggs challenged Duke Power's internal transfer policy, which required candidates to take a standardized test for all but the lowest paid position. Griggs claimed the test requirement discriminated against African American employees and violated the 1964 Civil Rights Act. The Supreme Court agreed unanimously in 1971, saying that companies must prove tests are reasonably related to the job it is required. So, that's what it said.
The Civil Rights Act of 1964 caused an influx of court cases related to the desegregation of housing, voting, and education. The case of Griggs v. Duke Power Company was centered on employment desegregation. Because there were many other court cases that took precedent, employment desegregation was placed on the back burner until Griggs was reviewed and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was inspected more closely. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibited any form of employment discrimination. The Griggs v. Duke case addressed the unfair recruiting, hiring, promotion, transfer, and performance measurements used at Duke Power Company. Prior to the passage of the Civil Rights Act, Duke Power overtly discriminated, assigning African American workers only to its labor department, where they performed janitorial work and shoveled coal. The working conditions were not good at all. Willie Griggs and 12 other African American employees sued Duke Power Company's Dan River Steam Station, a power generating facility located in Draper, North Carolina. These employees sued the company for acquiring a high school diploma or passing grade on standardized tests in order to be promoted or transferred into a different department. Because of segregation in the schools, many African Americans did not receive quality education and therefore were less likely to receive a high school diploma or passing grade on the standardized tests. At that time in North Carolina, a 1960 census showed that while 34% of white males had completed high school, only 12% of African American males had done so. In addition, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission found that 58% of whites passed the standardized tests used at this company, while only 6% of the African Americans passed. It was apparent that Duke Power's requirements for promotion were preventing African Americans from succeeding in the company. Because of these requirements, the majority of African American workers were kept in the lowest tiered department, the labor department, while whites were more likely to have higher positions in the other 4 departments. Willie Griggs and 12 other African American employees signed a petition and brought it to litigator Julius LaVon Chambers. On October 20, 1966, Chambers filed this petition to the district court. In 1968, Judge Gordon ruled that Duke Power's requirements were not discriminatory. Gordon based this decision off of Section 703H of the Civil Rights Act. This section stated that any professionally developed ability test that is not designed, intended, or used to discriminate because of race is allowed. The district court did not find discriminatory intent in Duke Power's employees' practices, and decided that Duke Power was not guilty for implementing these practices. Obviously, there were many flaws to the final decision in the district court. The case was then handed over to the Supreme Court on December 14, 1970. Justice Warren Burger stated that under the Civil Rights Act, even if the practices were not enforced with discriminatory intent, they are still considered unlawful if they negatively impact a certain group of individuals, such as the African Americans in this case. Justice Burger also came to the conclusion that these testing requirements were not predictors of future job performance, and therefore they were considered unnecessary. Justice Burger clarified that the purpose of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act is to protect employees from the enforcement of arbitrary requirements that prohibit employees from having an equal employment opportunity. After reviewing the evidence again and taking into account disparate impact, Justice Burger ruled Duke Power's employment practices illegal on March 8, 1971. Not only was justice served, but this decision set the stage for the enforcement of affirmative action. The debate of Griggs v. Duke Power Company had a major impact on future employment practices nationwide. Griggs v. Duke Power further revealed the purpose of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which is to protect individuals from discriminatory employment practices and to promote equality in the workplace. It was also the first court case to address affirmative action, which is the practice of improving educational and job opportunities for minorities. This debate further defined the concept of disparate impact, that practices in employment, housing, or other areas may be considered discriminatory and illegal if they have a disproportionate adverse impact on persons along the lines of a particular trade. Through this case, it was made clear that even if employees claim they did not have discriminatory intent, employment practices can still be considered illegal if they negatively affect a certain group of people. After this case, employees were provoked and encouraged to take action against discriminatory employment practices in their own companies. In fact, several cases such as Ward's Packing Company versus Antonio came as a result of Griggs v. Duke Power Company. Because of the Supreme Court's favorable ruling for Griggs, workplaces today have human resources departments that have strict standards for how they hire, promote, pay, and provide for their employees. Before the Griggs v. Duke Power case, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission had very little funds and accountability to follow through or to enforce fair employment practices. After playing a vital role in the Griggs v. Duke Power case, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission established itself as an invaluable reinforcement agent for equal employment practices. Since the Griggs v. Duke Power case, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has reinforced federal laws that prohibit discrimination against an applicant or employee because of their race, color, religion, sex, age, or disability. While African Americans still have a higher unemployment rate than white individuals, and there is still a lot of work that needs to be done, the establishment and growth of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has provided protection and the enforcement of equality in the workplace to employees. The Griggs v. Duke Power Company case provoked more strict enforcement of the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act and highlighted the importance of protecting individuals in the workplace, especially minorities, while providing each individual an equal opportunity to succeed in the work environment.
What that says is that we shouldn't hire all of any kind of person unless there's a validated test of some sort that verifies that's what it should be. I had a plant in Beijing that had one group in the plant, the largest group of employees in the plant, 100% women, 100%. And their average pay was higher than the average pay of the plant overall. So I felt that there was some equity that way, but I felt good about how we hired all women in that spot. And there were two places in my career where that's been the case. I worked in a plant in Anacostia, Ireland, where we had almost all female employees in that plant. And in both cases, the jobs were similar. But in the Anacostia, Ireland case, they hired women because they wanted to hire women, and there was nobody, and they were cheaper. And there was nobody that said you couldn't. And the Irish government was just happy there was a company there. And they didn't care who you hired or didn't care if you discriminated. And that was wrong. We had almost the same result in the plant in China, but we had a valid test. Now, both jobs, why women excelled at those two jobs was both jobs required incredible dexterity with their fingers. They were looking through a microscope all day and winding catheters for angiograms, catheters that have an electrode wound into the wall of the catheter. So we would make those into coils and extrude over those and make catheters for invasion, human heart invasion. And guys would screw those up way more often than women did. And so the entrance test was doing dexterity movements with your hand. First of all, my thumb is too big to text. And I don't have a really big thumb. But my thumb covers 4 keys on my text keyboard. Can I possibly text as efficiently as somebody whose thumb fits the numbers on the keyboard? The answer to that should be they have an advantage, right? And then if you add an additional hand-eye coordination advantage, and that's not gender related. That's some people have better hand-eye coordination than others. We call them wide receivers versus linemen when they're football players, right? Because the linemen don't need eye-hand coordination. Receivers do. So there are different jobs that require different skills, but if we test for those skills with a level playing field, we're legal, right? But if we test for those skills with a biased playing field, Something's wrong. I don't know if you noticed the data there, we're talking about 1970, only 1 out of 3 white males in North Carolina had a high school diploma. That's the United States. And that's not the most backwards United States by any means. That's Research Triangle Park. That is the finest pharmaceutical companies in the world. There's no intellect difference between people who live in any state, really. There's an educational difference. There's a school system difference. But there is not an IQ difference. And so how come 2 out of 3 in North Carolina didn't finish high school? Well, because, what's that?
I was gonna guess that they went to work early in mines or something.
No, you're close, tobacco fields. You could make a lot of money in tobacco fields, and you didn't have to finish college to do that. Or you could work for Reynolds or one of the tobacco companies and make really good money, didn't have to graduate from high school. And the black problem in Southern America has always been there's a school system problem. If you look at test scores today in Mississippi, we still have problems. There's not an IQ difference. There is teaching difference, curriculum difference, funding difference, a bunch of different things that add up to it. And a lot of people have been trying to fix that for a long time. And I don't know, this isn't a class about that. This is a class about the issue of what do we need to do to stay legal. We don't need to, and we don't have a high black population in southern Utah. In Washington County, it's under 1%, 0.9, based on the last census. That's not very many. But we have other minorities. Still, we don't have very many. We're pretty much a white county. And we're pretty, if we're born and raised here and not exposed to other parts of the world, this kind of, you look at it and go, wow, I mean, we read about it, but you don't live it or feel it. When you live it and feel it, it's different. And we do have plants in Utah that are high Spanish-speaking plants. And I wish I spoke Spanish. And I've worked in 2 places where I was one of the only, if not the only, at different times where English was my first language. And so hats off to people that can speak multiple languages. We have people around us that speak 5 languages. Do you realize what that is? 60,000 words is the lexicon that's required for fluency in a language. 12,000 to ask where the bathroom's at. You know, it doesn't take that many. You have to have enough to know when they answer you to understand where the bathroom's at. You know, so there, you know, a modicum of the language understanding is 12,000 words. Fluency is 60,000 words. I know people here that you would misjudge their IQ, but they speak 5 languages. They've got 300,000 words in their head. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. So we judge people wrong a lot of times, just based on an accent, or based on a presumption that they don't have education, or a presumption maybe that their IQ, we misread their IQ. People send signals. You know, there was a while where it was a really cool thing on the radical fringe of America to follow Charlie and get a swastika tattooed on your forehead, like Charlie Manson had, because that was just identifying me with that fringe. And I wanted to do that. We had people that made that choice to do. I'm not weighing in on tattoo choices. I am weighing in on a Nazi symbol on your forehead. You can't change that first impression that that's going to make. You're stuck with it, and you aren't doing anything but better wear a hat. You know, that's all I can say is if you don't want people to make a first judgment, you know, these are kind of things that we can do stuff. I mean, if I wanted to clean up and go to court, I'd probably cut my ponytail off, maybe, you know, stuff like that we would do, you know, shave up a little bit and look a little cleaner cut, because why we think that image projects something, and unfortunately it does. But on the flip side, we don't want to be judging based on things like that. Some of the most incredibly intelligent people I've met were people that would be easily to misjudge. Elon Musk is doing a favor to the entire world of autism. He admitted publicly that he's autistic. All of a sudden we go, really? The richest man in the world is autistic? My kid has a chance. Not to be the richest in the world, but to succeed, right? And to find his superpower. Elon found his superpower. I'm not sure what all it is. I've just been studying the Tesla house. Have you seen that, anybody? Tesla's got a whole division making homes. They're making homes for $10,000. A home for a husband, wife, and a child. Elon's been living in one for a year, he says. I don't know that for sure. But he says he has been. And it's supposed to be fairly self-sufficient home for $10,000. You've all got pickup trucks for more money than that. So would that change everything? Elon's a disruptor, right? And so, I don't know what his superpower is, but I know that he has multiple ones, and so does every autistic person that I've met. And the people that chose not to hire them might have made a mistake. Not saying for sure. But they might have made a judgment call based on something that was in the back of their head that was wrong. And we biased ourselves against somebody for a predisposition. We make an assumption because somebody has a criminal record that they're flawed. That is 100% not true. We all are one tiny decision away from a criminal record if you don't have one. And most people just lie about their records. Hope nobody checks and finds out. Because we're human beings. And so for us to, there's places where that matters. I understand. And it depends on the offense, right? Murder matters. And, those choices might be different than shoplifting cigarettes from Maverick. But they're both a record. And if you shoplift enough, they're both felonies. My son found out that running from the cops, which is the whole point of Grand Theft Auto 1, 2, and 3, which he mastered. The whole point was running from the cops. And he found out that's felony in the state of Utah. Just trying to get away from the cops. Now, they don't always nail you with that felony, but if they want to, they all can. That's a lifetime felony. You can't own a gun. You can't be hired in a whole lot of places where you totally are qualified to work. And we take that one decision and we classify people because of those decisions. What I want us to do is understand that and understand the law. The law requires certain protections, and we have certain protections as hirers. We're not forced to hire 50% women. Too bad. Because if we were, somebody would say we should be forced to pay them the same way they men. And Utah is very bad at that. I don't know the most current numbers in Utah. My numbers are a couple of years old. But a couple of years ago, a woman was making 38% in Washington County of what a man was making in the same job. That's unbelievable. That is unbelievable. That's how you got your job, right? I mean, you just go, I've heard many bosses say this. Well, she's got a husband and doesn't really need the job. That's go to jail words. You can't say that. You can't even think that. That's not okay. Their personal life is none of our business. What do they come to work and bring to work? And what would we pay a man to do that job? So we have to pay a woman. And if we don't, we're wrong. Whether you can get by with it or not is irrelevant. You're wrong. And that's not fair. I wouldn't want my daughter to have to live with that handicap of being underpaid or paid less because she's female. And so that's what these laws, that's kind of where it came from. Now, the pendulum often swings too far in either direction, right? When once the pendulum gets going, sometimes we make more laws than we should. We went through Title 8 at one point in time where we were required to have a ratio. When I went to college, it was in 1974, 5, in that range, and the universities were required to have a ratio reflective the county where the university was at. So if in that county the male-female population was whatever it was, that's what the student population had to be. If the black-white population was whatever it was, that's what the student population had to be. The government thought that was fair. I get the basis. I could draw that conclusion for a minute myself if the qualifications were all the same. But they're not. And so adding that back into the mix, the pendulum swung again a little bit. We have to be fair and even-handed the way we hire and what our hiring practices are, and what our testing practices are. I'll give you an example of, we're going to look at a little video about testing practices and validating. And if you're not in science, the word validating doesn't happen very much. We don't go through validation all the time. But I've been in this COVID world for a while, making vaccines for COVID, making tests for COVID, And validation is everything. You can't make a claim on your chemistry unless you can prove it. You have to prove it yourself, and then you have to prove it with somebody that is distant from you, and then you have to prove it with somebody that has their own equipment, not your equipment, so that it's a repeatable thing. And that's validation process that says this is real science. You didn't just make this up. We had 2 scientists at University of Utah a while ago that published on cold fusion. You might remember that. They said they'd figured it out. I'm not going to say their names because they ruined their careers on that. That wasn't fair for them. They've tried to rebuild it. Whether it was on purpose or an error, I don't know. I want cold fusion as bad as anybody does, and it would be cool to invent it and publish on it. But if you can't validate it, it's not an invention. It's not good science. And the tests, if you can't validate the tests that we give, then the tests aren't good science. For example, if I give a test that requires you to read, but the job does not require you to read. Suppose you are working in a sound booth in a recording studio, and you have a set of knobs that you need to control. Do you need to read? No, you need to know where the knobs are. Once you know what the knobs are, they're not going to move. You do not need to read to do that job. You need a dang good ear, though. And if I'm going to give you a test, giving you a test about how well you read is irrelevant to the job. I gave a test, I think I can say this. I gave a test to every employee at Interstate Rock one time, a while ago. Long enough ago that I'm pretty sure this guy isn't there any longer, is retired. I had one guy that refused to take the test, then he had excuses from taking the test, and then he asked if he could take the test home and bring it back to me and do it at home. And red flags are going up every time that he squirts around taking the test. And I'm going, this guy's afraid of passing the test. And he was in charge of a batch plant. He ran a batch plant for Interstate Rock. Computerized batch plant. It looks like a space shuttle inside the batch plant. It's got screens all the way around, and it's got all the ingredients that are going into a mix of concrete are being controlled in the chutes by the computer, by the system. And the batch plant operators run there, deciding how many tons of gravel to put in and sand and all the other ingredients, and they're running there. This is the guy that wasn't taking the test. Finally, I got one-on-one with him, and I discovered that he didn't know how to read. He'd never learned to read. He'd grown up here in our area and had not had the opportunity to go to school. He'd gone to work in a farm at a very young age, had done well, work ethic unbelievable, a good man, a really good man. He just didn't know how to read. What do you do? We taught him to read, because that job needed somebody that knew how to read. He had learned to read the colors and the height of bar graphs on the screens. He could not read the screens, but he had had enough help that he could run the batch plant by himself without reading, but he could not read the word of the test. You'd fail that employee. I think he's smarter than everybody else. Somebody that has learned to live in a reading of society without reading has got skills. They're covered for their inability to read all the time. I think that's an expert human being, if you ask me, and deserves a chance to learn to read if he wanted to, and he did. He wanted to, and Interstate Rock did the stand-up correct thing, and that they didn't let anybody know. This may be the first time that's been told in public. I actually hope it is the first time that's told in public. Because there was a man who was a good man and had to hide and cover something that he didn't have the skills for. And if they'd given the test across the board and just looked at test result, he would have failed and he would have been out of the system. He'd have been out of the program. And that would have been wrong. So tests have to be validated. So we're going to look at the validation process a little bit and a little bit about that fact of validating tests. Let's take a look. Another 8 minutes, I think, in employee selection.
After the recruitment process is produced, selection process is used to determine which applicants have the best chance of performing well on the job. Selection is the process of gathering information about job applicants to decide who should be offered a job. To make sure that selection decisions are accurate and legally defendable, the EEOC's, or Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's, Uniform Guidelines on Employee Selection Procedures recommend that all selection procedures be validated. Validation is the process of determining how well a selection test or procedure predicts.
Now, we looked at that, Uniform Guidelines and Employee Selection Procedures. Last class gave you a handout on that. And it's one of those legal terms that, we don't want to engage in and we don't want to read. We can't get around it if somebody takes us to task on it. And the HR department is charged with being on top of those things and understanding what that is, helping us stay legal.
Future job performance. The better or more accurate the prediction of future job performance, the more valid a test is said to be. The next selection devices that the most job applicants encounter when they seek a job are application forms and resumes. Both contain similar information about an applicant, such as a name, address, job educational history, and so forth. Though an organization's application form often asks for information already provided by the applicant's resumes, most organizations prefer to collect this information in their own format for entry into a human resource information system known as an HRIS. Employment laws apply to application forms just as they do all other selection devices. Application forms may ask applicants for only valid, job-related information. Nonetheless, application forms commonly ask applicants for non-job related information such as marital status, maiden name, age, or date of high school graduation.
Let me pause this for just a second also on that HRIS. In the larger the company, the more it will be that they're using an HRIS. It gives us the ability to post a job up on Indeed.com and collect all of the applicants, the applications to a single location sent to the company, and then the company's computer screens those for matches, and then the people only see what the computer filters and spits out. That's done through an HRIS. So if you're using the words that they're using in the job posting, if your experience includes the words that they're using in the job posting, you can game it a little bit to increase your likelihood of getting a match. Now, as an employer, there are some this whole thing about an application. We've had waves, as I said, the pendulum going back and forth. We've had waves where people handed out an application. You're taking an application, fill it out, and drop it back. Then we find out that their buddy filled out the application because they don't speak English. They brought back the application. Their application looks fine. It's who we want to hire. Then we find out they don't speak English. And it could be whatever language it is, but it's a problem if we thought they filled it out in English and it turns out that they don't speak fluent enough English. Now, in this is very job specific. There are companies that require English speaking, and there are companies that require it and would lose the requirement in a lawsuit, and there are companies that require it and would sustain that in a lawsuit. Let me tell you some of the pros and cons of it. Trucking firms are hiring high batches of non-English speaking or poorly English speaking drivers today. National freight companies, that's completely acceptable if you have a couple of things. If they've gotten a CDL, somehow they've had a translator, they've got enough knowledge that they can get a CDL. So that means they have enough knowledge to stay on the right course with road signs and things like that. Now, I've traveled in many countries where they don't speak English, and sometimes there's enough clues in. I've learned how to read German road signs right now. I don't speak German at all, but you can kind of learn what stop is, and Ausfahrt is exit. I just love that word. It's a cool word. And you learn a few things like that would allow you to drive, but you don't speak the language. And if you're a trucking company that does drop and hook, meaning you move trailers from a DC to a DC, they don't see a customer, they don't have to make delivery, they don't have to make conversation, that's totally fine. You don't need to speak English for that. And we have high populations of Bosnians, for example, run I-80. I forget the sect of India, the kind that carry a knife and wear turbans. I don't remember what religion that is. It's in northern India. That has a word. They eat special diets that are very restrictive, and they pray a lot. And in the truck driving profession, you can totally do that. You have to stop and take breaks every so often to keep your log current. So if you pray during that time, that's totally fine. And you can take your meals, make your meals, buy them in grocery stores, and eat in the truck. That's perfect. And you don't have to speak English to hardly anybody, which allows you to maintain your culture, maintain your religion, and have a good paying profession if you want to do it. That's a win for everybody. Really, that's a win all the way around. Do you want everybody to speak English? Maybe you do. And maybe we don't like jobs that don't require it. But that's wrong. That's illegal. As long as the job is one that can sustain whatever preference is, you can't require. On the flip side, if you require, you're making a drug, you're making a pharmaceutical device, you're making a product that can kill people, you have to be able to read the quality system of the company, the QMS they call it, quality management system. So you have to know exactly what is required to read a work instruction, a standard operating procedure, how to document a corrective action, nonconformance. You have to know all these English words that aren't normal English words to know that are part of the quality management system. There, it's required to speak English, enough English to know your quality management system. You don't have to be fluent in barroom English. You have to be fluent in quality management English, and whatever that entails. So if I'm testing somebody on their English, and it's for that purpose, I can't test them on barroom English or street English or gamer English. I have to test them on the kind of English that we're doing. Court stenographers, for example, are tested based on the types of court cases that they're likely to sit in. So they're documenting, they're still typing we record all court cases, right? But we still, by law, have a stenographer in the room that's typing down everything because our recordings still aren't perfect. They miss words, and if the stenographer misses words, she stops the trial and says, repeat that for the record. And so we have a more accurate version of the court case from the stenographer. Well, if the I knew a stenographer group that all they did was airplane crashes. And the language that's required in knowing airplane crashes, aircraft terminology, flying words, information, most of us don't speak that language. There's a specialty language there. So the court stenographers had to learn that. So if you're testing them, you tested them in that. We have medical transcribers that can only transcribe cardiology because the knee bone docs don't use the same language. They have other medical parts that they refer to. So the people that are transcribing the medical charts are trained in the part of English that includes that specialty area. So when you're testing them, you have to test them for that, right? That makes sense when you say it like that. But a lot of companies haven't done that. They hire people in the wrong slot and then fire them because they weren't capable, and everybody loses in that scenario. And at some point, the company may be risking non-validation rules that we're seeing here.
Nearly all organizations ask an applicant to provide employment references, such as the names of previous employers or coworkers whom they can contact to learn more about the candidate. Background checks are used to verify the truthfulness and accuracy of information that applicants provide about themselves and to uncover negative job-related background information not provided by applicants. Background checks are conducted by contacting educational institutions prior to employers, court records, police and government agencies, and other informational sources either by telephone, mail, remote computer access, or through in-person investigations. Unfortunately, previous employers are increasingly reluctant to provide references or background check information for fear of being sued by previous employees for defamation. If former employers provide potential employers with unsubstantiated information, that damages applicants' chances of being hired, applicants can and do sue for defamation. As a result, 54% of employers will not provide information about previous employees. Many provide only dates of employment, positions held, and date of separation. When previous employers decline to provide meaningful references or background information, they put other employers at risk of negligent hiring lawsuits, in which an employer is held liable for the actions of an employee who would not have been hired if the employer had conducted a thorough reference search and background check. Selection tests give organizational decision makers a chance to know who they're likely to do the best job and who won't. Pre-hiring assessments are growing in popularity, with 57% of large U.S. employers using some sort of pre-hiring test to ensure better fit. Specific ability tests measure the extent to which an applicant possesses a particular kind of ability needed to do a job well. Specific ability tests are also called aptitude tests because they measure aptitude for doing a particular task well. Cognitive ability tests measure the extent to which applicants have abilities in perceptual speed, verbal comprehension, numerical aptitude, general reasoning, and spatial aptitude. Biographical data, or biodata, are extensive surveys that ask applicants questions about their personal backgrounds and life experiences. The basic idea behind biodata is that past behavior, personal background, and life experience is the best predictor of future behavior. An individual's personality is made up of a relatively stable set of behaviors, attitudes, and emotions displayed over time. In short, it is personality that makes people different from each other. A personality test measures the extent to which an applicant possesses different kinds of job-related personality dimensions. Work sample tests, also called performance tests, require applicants to perform tasks that they actually do on the job. So, unlike specific ability tests, cognitive ability tests, biographical data surveys, and personality tests, which are indirect predictors of job performance, work sample tests directly measure job applicants' capability to do the job. Assessment centers use a series of job-specific simulations that are graded by multiple trained observers to determine applicants' ability to perform managerial work. Unlike the previously described selection tests that are commonly used for specific jobs or entry-level jobs, assessment centers are most often used to select applicants who are high potential to be good managers. Assessment centers often last 2 to 5 days and require participants to complete a number of tests and exercises that simulate management work. In interviews, company representatives ask job applicants job-related questions to determine whether they're qualified for a job. Interviews are probably the most frequently used and relied upon selection device. There are several basic kinds of interviews: unstructured, structured, and semi-structured. In unstructured interviews, interviewers are free to ask applicants anything they want, and studies show that they do. Because interviewers often disagree about which questions should be asked during interviews, different interviewers tend to ask applicants very different questions. Furthermore, individual interviews seem to have a tough time asking the same questions from one interview to the next. The high level of variety can make things difficult. As a result, while unstructured interviews do predict job performance with some success, they're about half as accurate as structured interviews at predicting which job applicants would be hired. By contrast with structured interviews, standard interview questions are prepared ahead of time so that applicants are asked the same job-related questions. Structuring interviews also ensures that interviewers ask only important job-related information. Not only are the accuracy, usefulness, and validity of the interview improved, but the chances that interviewers will ask questions about topics that violate employment laws are reduced. Semi-structured interviews lie between structured and unstructured interviews. A major part of the semi-structured interview, perhaps as much as 80%, is based on structured questions, but some time is set aside for unstructured interviewing to allow the interviewer to probe into ambiguous or missing information uncovered during the structured portion of the interview. How well do interviews predict future job performance? Contrary to what you've probably heard, recent evidence indicates that even unstructured interviews do a fairly good job. When conducted properly, however, structured interviews can lead to much more accurate hiring decisions than unstructured interviews do. In some cases, the validity of structured interviews can rival that of cognitive ability tests.
I'm sure you've got an opinion on that one, and I do too. The law, however, is not an opinion. We have to do what we have to do, and things have to be validated. And if they're validated and the company doesn't go by the test results, then that opens up another problem. So if you say, well, we give everybody this specific test, and no one has validated the outcome of that test, you can't go back to why you draw the conclusions you're drawing, then you're open to a lawsuit case. There's an example, there's a company, worldwide company called Milliken. Milliken used to have a plant here in St. George, and as have you ever seen that Walmart and Costco sell mattresses now that have all the air sucked out of them and they're just rolled up, and you can order a mattress online. It comes in a little box like this, and you're going, "That's a mattress?" And they go, "Yeah, pop it out, let the air in it, it'll be fine." And it is. It's like, how did that happen? Well, when that happened, Milliken shut their plant down here because they built a plant to provide the batting for the Sealy mattresses in Salt Lake and a couple of other mattress factories. And mattresses have historically been very hard to ship. They don't weigh that much, and not that many fits in a truck, and you guys buy them all day, every day. You know exactly what we're talking about. In fact, I heard one time you were the biggest consumer of mattresses of one of the brands. Is that right?
Sort of.
That's crazy. That's awesome. As a matter of fact, right here in town, the largest customer. That's very impressive. So, Milliken is a great company. They win awards nationally. Internationally, it's an international company. They've got plants all over the world, and they make stuff. They make fiber and textile products. The inside winding in a golf ball, almost all that's made by Milliken. You know, I didn't even think somebody made that stuff. I thought that was just rubber bands in a hairdryer. You know, I didn't know that was something that you manufactured. They also, I ran into the guy one time. He's the guy that sells the fuzz on a tennis ball. Milliken makes that. And so somebody sells it. I ran into the guy on an airplane. You know, he said he worked for Milliken, I said, "Oh, Milliken has a plant in my town." And he said, "Which one was it?" And we got to talking, and he actually has a job selling the fuzz on tennis balls to Spalding and tennis ball companies, you know, and most of whom aren't in the U.S. anymore. But anyway, Milliken makes all kinds of stuff, and they believe in hiring engineers. They like hiring engineers. They are known to be a good place to work, and they're known for having really high quality standards and for being where they value people to think. They want people to figure stuff out and make the processes better. Which, one thing for a fireproof batting on a mattress, it was kind of bizarre. They were treating these mattress things with all kinds of chemicals, and then people had problems with the chemicals, right? You know, they'd react with the chemicals and all kinds of stuff, and somebody, Milliken, a low-level person, a worker on a production floor in South Carolina, said, "Let's try something." And they lit it on fire. And they said, they put the fire out, and they said, "Now it won't burn again." And so, the people go, "Well, that's a stupid idea." They go, "Huh." And so they made a process that did just that. All the batting went through a flame tunnel, and they burn it. And so all the little whiskers and the small stuff, the little, tender kind of stuff, burned right off of it. It's hard to catch it on fire. It had already been pre-burnt, so to speak. And that was their process. And it's like, wow, how cool is that? So they let employees help them make that stuff. So they had a test. I knew a guy. Luke and I both know the guy. He's from St. George. His name is Rich Zitting. You might know Rich. Rich is he should retire sometime. He's my age, and he ought to slow down, but he doesn't seem to want to. He was a plant manager for SKF, the largest bearing manufacturer in the world, for quite a few years. He was going to go to work for Milliken, but it turned out, what I'm going to tell you, they wouldn't hire him. So he went to work for Berry's Manufacturing, and Berry said, we need to make hollow 9mm bullets. And of course, hollow point, everybody wants to carry hollow points for defense, right? And so, but they didn't know how to make, they didn't know any hollow points at Berry's Manufacturing. And Berry's makes a lot of bullets. They hired Rich, said, can you help figure us out how to make hollow points? And Rich goes, I don't know, but I think so. And he set up a production process. They can make 1 million hollow point 9mm per day. That's cool. That's a production facility. You make 1 million of anything a day. That's a production facility. It's a little joint next to Costco. It's like, really? Yeah, that's true. So I'm glad Rich didn't go to work for Milliken, because we can carry locally made 9mm if we want to now. That's good. But here's what happened with Rich. Milliken said, we like to hire engineers, and we have a test. It's an engineering aptitude test, weekly engineering aptitude test, and it's worldwide. It's published in a bunch of different languages, and that's our standard. You have to score a certain amount on that test before you can apply for the job. And Rich goes, oh, okay, I'll take the test. Rich took the test, turns it in. South Carolina calls Milliken here, talked to the plant manager, who I knew at the time, and said, I don't know what we're going to do, because we also got his application. He scored the highest score we've ever had worldwide, anybody ever taking the test. And we've had a professor from MIT take the test. Rich scored higher. If you know Rich, you know that's it. But Rich never got a degree. The only college he had was finishing my class, this class. Milliken made a very bad mistake. They made a very wrong assessment of a person because he didn't have a degree. And they didn't let their test tell them what their test was supposed to tell them. He got the highest score anybody in their system in 25 years of giving that test. He got the highest score anybody had ever got. Wouldn't you want to hire that guy? I'm dumbfounded. Absolutely dumbfounded. And I'm a friend of Rich's. I've known him long enough to call him my friend, and I think he would call me his friend. And I said, Rich, you've got a lawsuit here. You've got a very large company that needs to pay for what they did. And that's the rest of the character. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I thought, how cool is that? At that point in time, he didn't have a job with Barry's. At that point in time, he just did the right thing. In his mind, and his compass was, you sue somebody, you have to live in the past. I want to live in the present. It's kind of a nice philosophy for all of us, I think. There are times when we need to sue people, and I understand that part. But when you get embroiled in a lawsuit, they call it embroiled for a reason. That kills frogs and lobsters, and it'll kill you too. I mean, it's kind of thing, it's a bad place to get embroiled. And if you can avoid a lawsuit, I advise you to do that, because a lawsuit sucks you into the past. So is a divorce, right? It sucks you into the past. And that's a bad place to have to live our life today. We want to live today. Anyway, that wasn't about that. This was about Rich and a company that made a wrong decision, and they were lucky they didn't get sued. And I think in the end, Rich was lucky he didn't get the job. They'd have probably wanted him in South Carolina or someplace, and he likes it here better anyway. So I think it was a win all the way around. But if that was my company, I'm pretty sure they would have sued me, because that was wrong what they did. That was wrong. You can have, if you're saying that's your test, that has to be your test. Somebody scores good on it, you got to hire them. If that's your criteria. And, they would have wiggled on that. They would have said, yeah, we had 2 criteria. Not just that one, but you also had to have a degree. They didn't say that. That came up afterwards. They wanted him to have a degree. And I understand they wanted him to have a degree. I get that part. But I think there's times when we all need to make an exception. If he was 22 years old, then I'd say that was a child prodigy, and I don't know if you want him yet. He might need some life experience behind him. But he wasn't. He had an impeccable track record that was investigatable, and they could have gotten references. And what the video we just saw says that 51% of companies, and it's a higher number now, I think it grows all the time, refuse to give references. Let's talk about that for a second, because I've advised companies on both sides of that one. If you are my client and you are a company, I would tell you, under no circumstances do you ever give a reference for somebody. Simply say and confirm whether they worked for you or whether they didn't, and confirm the dates that they worked for you. That's to keep you safe and out of court. Humanely, that does not do your employee a favor. And if you like that person and they moved on from your place, you're kind of in a dilemma, right? You're caught in the horns of a dilemma there. Be safe or do the guy a solid, and give him a good reference. I am not in this class going to advise you to give him a good reference. I'm simply going to say what the dilemma is. That's the dilemma. You're on your own on that one. If you know the person, it's the right thing to do. I don't think you usually go wrong by doing the right thing. But anyway, that's why companies take that position. Now, if I am calling for references, and I call a company where they take that position, and so if you are my client now and you're trying to hire people, and you're calling that company to check references on somebody you want to hire, they'll tell you, well, you got to send a written request to confirm employment to our HR department. That's kind of what they say. But if you know the person that they reported to, their supervisor, you also can call that person. They will tell you the same thing, but as they say that, okay, that's cool, I understand that. Could you just tell me, would you hire him again? And that quick question sometimes will get an answer. And if it's, in a heartbeat. If there's no pause and there's an answer like that, you got all you need to know. They didn't give them a reference. They did the right thing, the safe thing, but you got the information you want. Or if they say, oh, hell no, you also got the information. And sometimes a supervisor won't think fast enough to check the tongue like that. I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just saying they'll get caught off guard by the question and they'll answer it before they should have answered it. And so you also then got the information you need to get to weigh with the rest of the facts. If you make that the only reason you don't hire them, you are on thin ice. Because they told you that they don't give references, and he made a comment, she made a comment, and you're acting on that comment. That's dicey. I would just use that as confirmation. If you have another red flag, 2 red flags add up to maybe you shouldn't hire. And 3 red flags for sure add up to you probably shouldn't hire. And Jim Collins, those of you that remember us going together in a previous class and talking about Jim Collins, one of the things he said the great companies do when in doubt about a hiring decision, don't do it. Wait. If there's any question about whether you're making the right hire, it's too hard to get rid of a C player, and you want A players. So you get a C player, they don't deserve to be fired, but you hired them. And now you wish you had an A player. So Jim Collins says, wait till you find that A player if you can. So, and speaking of those of you that were with us in that class, just a side note on that, at least half of you in the room know Kenward McMahon. He was in the class, sat in that chair most of the time, and he was the guy that reminded me to turn the tape recorder on. He just got promoted to the Director of Quality for Wilson Electronics.
All right.
That's a $130 million company, and he's the guy in charge of quality. And I think that is awesome. That's what he went to this class for, was to get, and he's been promoted a series of times to get to that position. And I was delighted when he texted me last night and said he just got it. And I thought that was very cool. Told him I'd tell you guys. So if you see him and he travels it somewhere, tell him congratulations, because that was a goal for him that he really wanted to achieve, and he deserves it. And he studied hard and given up like you guys are. Coming to school at night's hard to do, especially when you've been up at 3 in the morning to go to work. That's hard, and some of you stayed up all night to work, and then you come here, and then you go do your side job, and then I don't know how that works. Time for us to take a break. We're going to do that. I will warn you that at 6 o'clock, the college had is hosting a barbecue for the faculty, staff, and employees down in the lobby downstairs. And I don't know what that means. Students aren't officially invited, but if your nose follows you down that way and there's food laying around, it might. I don't know. I mean, don't tell them I sent you yet. Tell them I told you to stay away from it. But that's going on in the lobby. It is kind of a closed event, but I don't know what it is. So I'm sure it's not a catered dinner. So if it's a barbecue, I'm thinking there's got to be a hot dog laying around somewhere, right? Or cookies or something. So cruise by if you want. I'll see you back in 10 minutes. analysis. Jake, did that come from you?
It came from
You
all
did,
three of
good
us.
job. Okay, thank you.
There's maybe a wall and then there's
I remember, I saw Jeff with it, actually scheduling, because today, told somebody that it's for in August, yeah.
Yeah, I sent you ours as well on email.
I saw yours. I just barely saw it.
Right.
Yeah, thanks. I was walking down the hallway, so,
and then it's gonna shoot back up.
thank you.
So just enjoy
Yeah.
it. Slows down a little bit, don't, these days, 'cause yeah, we don't need to have that.
You know, that's the thing is, the nice thing about job security, what I love of this class is that, I look at it from the point of view, you know, they fired me. They gotta look at, oh, look, we're down the drain, the whole
Yeah.
payment for the class.
Yeah.
And I'll still roll up the class, look at that.
I have got them up, but I don't know how.
You did better than I did on that one.
So they are posted.
I paid for it myself.
I just want to jump over a couple people's heads.
They're all on LinkedIn, but I still don't know how to get from Canvas to that address. And so what I'm wondering is if you could sign in. I wonder if that works. Let me just see. It might have to sign in. You might have to sign in. Let me see about that. You might know YouTube better than I do, so. The only thing on this channel is these videos. Okay, so. I don't know if I hit create, that's where I upload photos or videos, so. Let's see if I have that. Nope. There they are. And so, can they are not. College, that was our biggest thing. College did not want to do that because it gives everyone access to our classes that we charge tuition for. What I don't know is, so which class did you miss? Well, I think that in another couple of days, that IT will be back to me with the link for the camera. And so, what I'm wondering is, why is this on there without, this as a draft? That's weird too. 7 videos are up there. So it looks like I have to get that draft part figured out anyway. So don't worry about it until I get back to you. So, thank you for asking.
Hey, Steve.
Yes, sir.
So this class first started, you told me I was gonna go, so I told my that girl that comes in here, whatever, student, whatever, she texted me and said, hey, we need to pay the fee for this class, so I went told Peggy, we need to go pay some pay the fee. And, you know, and he told me, he said, hey, I'm gonna receipts for the class, like, hopefully you can, this, all that. Well, there's 4 charges, I think, 3 charges, I think, there's 2. So there's the 200 for the first class, and this class, and then there's the 200. So in the morning, they charge, they got charged twice.
Sounds like it. Let's go, this is Maddie, is that her name?
Looks like that.
Yeah, so I have a meeting with Maddie on Tuesday morning. And so, I will ask her on Tuesday morning to look it up and see what's going on. You know, get you twice.
Right, and they said that too, I mean, if we just need to keep it there,
Yeah, we
and then
can
just pay the next
do
class.
that.
Yeah, that's fine, they didn't care, he didn't care either, I'm not picking it, I was like, know,
house,
but
and she's empty.
I'm pretty sure somebody charged the car just because it's already there.
What
Food
is it,
comes
like
from down
biscuits
there.
or something? 'Cause it smells good.
That's why.
There's a lot of stuff.
Because I heard that, I actually logged into campus and did it.
Okay, I'll get
Cookies, drinks.
I bet
I'll be
you-
late.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go check too.
Yeah, I figured that was just.
I have a
Just
solid
go down
number.
there.
We're supposed to be there and just.
We are supposed to be there.
Yeah, we put.
That's good.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I went to the HVAC program, so I was like, I know Ashley in the construction. And they're like, where are you now? I had to throw you under. I said, I'm up in Steve's right now. And they're like, they want me. That's fine. Thinking that, yeah.
scored, huh?
Swag.
Well, they're telling people to take more.
So, wow, that's awesome.
It is.
Looks like they're having a little party.
You should have gone down there.
So as usual, those of you that scored food, you're welcome to eat that while the rest of us wish we had gone downstairs, right? We're going through the requirements of human resource. We're looking at talent development, the components that go with that. We've laid a lot of foundational work. The place that we're at in those that at some point in time may want to take the exam for HRCI certification or SHRM certification. There are different exams. We're in the cluster right now called the interpersonal cluster, where we're looking at relationship management, we're looking at communication, and we're looking at global mindset going forward. We've been looking at workforce planning, strategic development, and ethics, and some of those topics that we've covered. Just kind of want to give you kind of an update on the roadmap of where we're at. And the sub-competencies under relationship management, because when you talk about relationship management, I go, what do you mean? I've been divorced a couple times. Does that count? As a bad relationship. I haven't been divorced a couple times, but I have been divorced once and I've had 2 wives die. So that's worse than divorce. But anyway, I've been down that road. So is that relationship management what they're talking about? And the answer to that is no. That is not what they are talking about. What are we talking about when we look at talent development in terms of relationship management? What are we thinking? What comes to your mind?
Relationships in relationship to talent management. Knowing your employees well enough to even know what their talents are.
Okay? So understanding the relationships within the company, for sure. What else are we looking at in relationship management?
Peace.
Say that again.
Peace and quiet.
It's really a broad subject. That's part of it, looking at what do we have in terms of talent already, what do we need in developing relationships from the places that we can get talent from. Let's suppose we need to hire a bunch of welders. Having a relationship with schools that have welding programs might be a good thing to do. Even if it's just high schools, could offer internships and training while they go on and get whatever other training you might like to see them have at your company. And so we look at relationships potentially with sources of talent. So that could be schools, could be clubs. I've seen more than you would think. I have seen companies that get their talent from a very small pool, by exception, a religious church, for example. And I'm not thinking of LDS. Living in this town with 68% members of LDS, there's a natural tendency in that direction. But I'm actually thinking of a couple of other faiths where that's been a priority for hiring. That's a dangerous one. But I've seen companies that have done that. And so building relationships with that group, whatever the group is, I know a number of companies that prefer veterans. I think that's an awesome payback, giving veterans a chance, a leg up on getting hired first over somebody that has equal qualifications. If one's a veteran, they get preference. I'm okay with that. That's discriminatory in a good way, right? That's not a negative way of discriminating. That's returning a favor for somebody that signed a document that said they're willing to die for the things that I value. That's pretty cheap trade, to offer that. But relationships of the veteran group or vocational rehab, maybe we have a relationship that we can, any place where we could see a source of talent, entry level or senior level at the company, we're talking about that relationship. We're talking about more. We're talking about vendor relationships. Now the procurement department is responsible for vendor relationships, yes? Let's say for now, no. That may be on their job description. But what happens when they leave? My company. I want my company to have a relationship with that vendor, not just the procurement person. So I'm in favor of a procurement person calling a favor and having a great relationship with the supplier. That's how we get stuff. I got no issue with that at all. But it shouldn't be unique to that. It should be a company relationship. And HR should be driving that, in my opinion, because the owner of the company should be driving the future. The HR is part of the team that's preserving our present and where we're going, protecting the assets of the company. And that's one of that knowledge, that relationship is one of the assets of the company. In a bigger company, there's another important relationship, and whether this falls specifically on the HR function, it certainly falls on an owner. That is a brand relationship with your customers. Your customers expect something from you. There's an expectation. That's why they bought a Tesla. There are certain things with the customer group that buys those cars that is somewhat, it's an implied contract, isn't it? That this group of buyers think they're buying something special. Tesla has a responsibility for managing the brand, the relationship with the kinds of customers that are managing that brand. Harley-Davidson faced that a long, long time ago and is probably one of the most successful that I have seen navigating a foot into canoes. The brand Harley-Davidson is strong because of the biker world that are outlaws. That's who built that brand. Like it or not, that's who built that brand. However, the outlaw bikers aren't buying Harleys. I mean, they only own Harleys, but they're not lining up buying new ones every year. They're fixing up that old panhead, still a Harley. And they're chrome plating it, and they will not put an S&S in that. They'll deal with lower horsepower. That's okay. They're loyal to the brand. But Harley can't market to that brand. They can't trash that brand. They got a dilemma. The buyers of Harley-Davidsons, their number one target market when I was working with Harley, and I don't know if it's still the same, was 35-year-old accountants. That was the primary buying segment of Harley-Davidsons. They had enough money to buy a $30,000 bike, and they wanted it. Because that's the only way they got out of the spreadsheet. To get on a bike and take a ride. And Harley knew that. So Harley's trying to sell this rebel brand to accountants and not spoil either one. Because if accountant's boss finds out that they're on the edge, now they're going to look at the guy for fraud just because he's on Harley. That isn't right. And so how do you balance that relationship with the customers that made your brand and the customers that are now paying your bills? That changes in companies. Some of you might remember a guy named Jerry Garcia. If you do, there was a whole followership in America of the Grateful Dead. And they had a brand that generated their money not from the people that were recording their songs at illegal concerts in the back alleys of Chicago and the desert and wherever else they chose to play. Their brand was the people who was buying their shirts and never heard the band live. Their brand was I've got Jerry Garcia ties. You've seen a couple of them here. Are you kidding me? He's been dead. No, he's been out of market for a long time, right? And so we go, how do you preserve The value of a brand, that's a relationship between you and a group of customers, and it might not be the same group that built your company. So most of us don't have that problem right now. We're in little companies that aren't there quite yet. But I want us to be gearing our thinking as if we're going to be CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. Because this is some of the things that we have to think about. And really, your brand value, it's like your integrity. That's the most valuable thing you have. What is the value of your brand? And that's what people pay when they try to buy you out. And that's what's called blue sky. Blue sky value. It's not actually, you can't go to the bank and cash it. But what is it worth to own the name Harley-Davidson? You know, if they quit doing business, well, we've seen a company just like that do it. You heard of Norton? You heard of Triumph? Those companies are gone, but the brand stayed alive. How did the brand stay alive? It had value. And people bought that value. A snowmobile manufacturer buys Indian. Really? Yeah. So Indian motorcycles aren't made by Indian anymore, and haven't been for 100 years, just about, whatever. It's a long, long, long time. 50 years anyway. And so that relationship with our brand is something we also have to talk about. And I think that the HR team is the treasure bank of this information for the company. And if I'm the owner of the company, I want to put that in their hands, not alone, but I want to make sure the company is having it. Let me give you the biggest piece of that, is the database of your customers. Who owns that? You start talking to the sales guys, they think they do. That's my little black book. Those are my customers. Okay? If you work for me, you sign a contract that said that is your little black book. And it says those are your customers. But as soon as they are my customers too, they're our customers. And I want them in my database, and if you win the lottery and leave, I want us to know the guy's name. And I want to know all the in and outs, when the last time you called him, and what was the result of that. Because anytime we have turnover in a company, we go backwards if we're not preserving our value. And so those relationships that our sales team and our engineering team and our installation team, how many times is it that the strongest relationship is the installers? Bunch of times, isn't it? They're the guys that came and made it work. They're the guys that got, and the sales guys are off, eating mangoes somewhere. They're not anywhere to be found. But the installer is fixing a problem, and that's gold. So we want to have a database of all of these incidents. We want to know what it is. And those of you that are familiar with software, there are a number of databases that are available, many of them expensive now, because they figured out how much they're worth. Salesforce is one. That's a brand. That's a software package. Much cheaper is ACT. These are contact management software packages, and they're specifically designed for sales, but I think they're designed for corporate relationships. They have a hopper. You put all your leads in the top of the hopper, metaphorically in the game, and certain things happen as they come closer and closer to making a decision. At some point, they pop out the hopper as a customer. So they go from a lead to a prospect to paying customer. And that's the sales cycle. That happens all the time. And so if I know where, I know right now what customers we have. I know what orders we have on the books. Those guys have already decided to buy from us. Who are the next guys that are going to buy from us? I don't know them. The sales guys do, in some cases. And we should know those as a company, because I don't want to be beholden to a sales team that might get pissed off at some point and decide to go work for the competitors. Wilson Electronics had that happen. SureCall is the name of the company. That is their primary competitor. They hired pretty much the sales and marketing team from Wilson Electronics at one time. Most of them still live here, and they allow them to telecommute. That's a good way to win two things. You get a good team and weaken your competitor at the same time. And if you don't have their database, if you don't know what they know, you're topped up. You're going to have to rebuild that with an entirely new team. So I like to see that cached somewhere in the company, and HR is a great place to do it. So they can help us keep track of vendors, help us keep track of customers, help us keep track of employees. We also, how about, Nike knows who the next golf pro is gonna be that they're gonna put their name on the shoes. And he's probably in 6th grade right now. They're watching kids coming out of schools, and they're paying attention to the next waves of pros, and they got relationships going with them right now so that they'll sign with them once they win a tournament. And these kids are getting younger and younger that are winning tournaments. And wouldn't you like that? So the competitor that's not doing that is not gonna get his name on the shirt of the guy that just won the last golf tournament. And so same is true with all sports. They're all doing that. So your feeder league, who are the next people that are gonna be important to your company? I like to have that in the database. Who are the consultants that you call? Who is the spare workforce that you call if you've all of a sudden got 10 people that called in sick? Who do you go to? These are, or if COVID happens, what do? You shut down, or do you figure out a way, because HR's got a database of temps that we can call, people that are friendly to us, people that know part of what we're doing, people that partially train. Those are all relationships, aren't they? And to put those in a clearinghouse, a database in one location in the company is smart. To make the HR director able to hold you hostage is not smart. So have access to that, make backups of that, understand what's in there, but understand that this is the company's and it's valuable and we don't want to lose it. Does that all make sense? All right. So the second thing in our list here in relationship management is networking sub-competencies that they want us to talk about. Relationship building, relationship management, networking, and some teamwork stuff. We've talked a little bit about teamwork already, but we haven't talked about networking at all.
Hey, Steve,
Yes, sir.
I know people try it and people do, but is it actually sustainable if they make you, like somebody sign something that says, hey, any relationship you make with our company, once you leave, stays here, you don't get to touch it?
That's usually dicey, whether it's enforceable or not. And that happens most often with sales, in engineering sometimes. The discovery part, the current lab notebook that the engineer has, that is company property, indisputable. But a sales relationship, that's disputable. What the courts generally allow in most states, and every state is different with their laws, but when you have these are non-compete clauses that you put into contracts with employees, basically, is at least part of that. So that.
Well, is that non-compete a little different than taking a relationship, right?
Well, it's your relationship, and they're competing with it in a
Right.
sense that it falls under the umbrella of non-compete clauses, and the enforceability has to do with two things in most states. Most is a radius, considered a reasonable radius, and that depends on the scarcity or the rareness. If you are a rocket manufacturer, there's only 3 facilities in the United States, so a radius would be the United States pretty much. If you are a pizza shop, the radius might be St. George, and Mesquite might be out of that radius because it's not reasonable that your business is drawing from that radius. So if they go down there and start your business down there, you probably can't enforce that in a non-compete or a relationship ownership problem. The
Well, I know
other.
that, sorry about that, like the Cavitec, we've talked about them a lot.
Mhm.
But I know a bunch of them. A lot of their sales when they left, that's how they got their businesses started. Because they took their relationships with them. And I know several installers, like you said, that made relationships from the company they worked for and said, hey, screw it, I'm going to start my own company, and took them too.
Yeah. One of the best salesmen that I ever met was one of the Cavitec salesmen. You probably know him. He's working for Boardwalk right now.
On Boardwalk?
Working for Boardwalk right now. He's just a great salesman, and whether you like him as a person or not, he's a good, consummate salesman. Does what he's supposed to do.
Well, the guy that owns Boardwalk's the same way.
Yeah,
Like,
he is.
they both were salesmen
He is.
before Cavitec.
And so in that case, it was less of an issue because Cavitec failed to exist. Had
they-
they done that, while Cabinet Tech was coming up, and they did start it while Cabinet
They,
Tech was
yeah,
coming
so
up.
they did leave before
And,
that.
and that's questionable, and whether, I mean, there's a lot of questions there about equipment and ownership and a variety of things like that. Let's circle back to the question of the other thing that gets you out of a non-compete, in some cases, is if it's a limited profession, it's all you know how to do, the court cannot deny you a right to earn a living. And if you've been terminated from the other company, if you walked away, you probably can't enforce it. But if you've been terminated from the other company and you have a contract in place with that other company, it most likely won't be enforceable. This is an ugly business. I've been on both sides. I've been sued for violating a contract like that. So I've been through the court case. I won it, but it was not a thing I'd want you to have to do. And that was tried in Delaware and then tried again in Utah. They tried it twice to try to stop me. And it was not something I intended to happen at all. I don't roll that way. But there were some predatory, it was a public company, and predatory people, and they had a lot of attorneys. And so attorneys like to do stuff. And you just don't want to be on really either side of that when it occurs. And my profession wasn't that way. The non-compete, had it been legitimate, would have stood, but it wasn't legitimate, and that was the problem. There was a forged signature on it, my forged signature. I didn't sign it, and that was a problem. And we had to find the secretary who would forge my signature in order to finally win the court case, which you don't want to do that. You don't want to do that at all. It's not fun. But in terms of intellectual property, generally your client
Did you not sign it
list.
because you didn't want to?
I'm sorry?
Did you not sign it because you refused to, or did she just not do her paperwork and then she just,
I refused to sign it,
oh, so she did it after that?
and she did it after that. She did it after I left, actually. Yeah, at the coercion of her doctor boss. And you can't blame her. I mean, you can. That's an ethics decision. But when it's your job, and you need your job,
Yeah.
that's really hard. And the court was pretty lenient with her. They were not lenient with the company, as they shouldn't have been. It was not the right thing to happen. But weird stuff like that does happen, and you have to take it as you go. What the court does show in most intellectual property, engineers are going to sign a deal with most companies that says anything you invent while you're here, we paid for it, it stays here. It's not yours. Some will grant you a license to co-practice it. Once you leave, if you've got a patent or invention, I used to bonus engineers on patents issued, and if a patent was issued, I always allowed them to have their name on the patent and the ability to participate in action with the patent, even if they left the company. And so that was about as generous as you could get to an engineer, where you wanted to really say, you don't own it at all. I mean, the guy that invented Post-it notes for 3M, we all think he got rich. He lives in St. George, or Washington Fields, across the river there, and in a modest neighborhood, and he's a really, really nice guy. His name's Fred, and I've talked to him. I lived in his neighborhood, and he is an engineer for 3M, knew up front that you'll get a bonus, and that's it. And that's fair, because he said, they paid my life's work. He worked there for 30 years or something. He said, I love my job, I love the company, and it was awesome that I made a difference to the company. And they bonused him something on it, but nothing compared to what you would get if you got 1 penny for every pack of Post-it notes that were sold. There's another guy in town who from General Mills, Doc is his name, he works over at the university. When he came back from Vietnam, his kid kept knocking cereal over on the table, and the Cheerios would go everywhere, and finally took out an X-Acto knife and cut the tab on the top of his box of cereal and said, there, lock it down. And the kid did, and he sent the idea into General Mills, and they said, that's brilliant, let's do that. And he didn't patent it. They voluntarily still pay him a penny a box of cereal that they sell. And he's made a fortune off of boxes of cereal from a good idea.
Wow.
Now, in that case, they didn't owe it to him. They just knew it was the right thing to do as a company, and what's a penny on a box of cereal? They decided that was the right thing to do for his lifetime. I'm pretty sure it won't assign to his heirs, but who cares? They did more than they had to do. But intellectual property is sticky that way. And what is yours and what is the company's really needs to be defined if it's a question. And where you've got a business and you've got an employer, that's an important question to have clear. Because you don't want the employer, which has deep pockets and a lot of attorneys, to go south on you at some point in time. You know, because you've got a lot of intellectual property you help develop for the company, and if you've got outside application for that, make sure you're protected on how you do it. It's doable, unless you've completely signed away everything, but if you haven't, then let your wife invent a bunch of cool stuff and get around it somehow.
Right.
If you can, legally. I didn't say that. So networking. We want to talk about networking for a few minutes because a lot of introverted people hate to network, and most extroverted people don't see the immediate value in it, just fun. They do it, but they don't see the value of networking. And so we're talking about networking as part of an HR function, and that networking stuff goes in the database that I'm thinking about. So for example, I found out one time when I added up how many dollars the Stephen Wade dealerships collection were paying on clubs. You know, the Kiwanis, the Rotary, all these memberships that they had, they had to be members of everything that's in town. And they just viewed that as a marketing cost. And it is. That's a rightful place to put it. But what is the opportunity there? What is the opportunity in networking if you own Stephen Wade dealerships?
Huge. Those guys are the ones gonna be buying the cars, not hiring them, actually.
This is a golden place to work, isn't it? To work this database. And the company was doing nothing. In fact, they were sending guys as a perk. You want lunch today? You're gonna go to the Kiwanis Club and have lunch. And they go and it was a perk for employees to go to the various club events and participate in them on behalf of their employers, like free time off, which is cool. I'm not saying not to do that, but I'm saying, wait a minute, how do we want to work the Rotary? Who are the members? How many are there? What do they do? What are they driving? When are they going to buy another car? I want to know all of that stuff. I want to know what all is parked in their driveway. How many of them's our brand? Because we found out, and even in a small town like this, most people haven't bought a car from this same salesman twice. Most people have not. Just for yucks and grins, has anybody in this room bought one person, two people? Two people in this room, collectively, we probably bought 100 cars, would you think, amongst us? And I know you have, because I have. So I know we're safe with that number. And yet we can't raise our hand and say we bought two vehicles from the same salesperson in a small town. I think that's messed up. Not on our part, on their part, the industry's part. Something's wrong there. They're not building relationships. We're talking about relationships. They're not building relationships, and Stephen Wade dealership wasn't tracking any of it at all. Just looking at writing checks, looking at it as a necessary business expense. Because you know what it cost us to say no to the Elks, or what our name of club there. It's not, VFW. There's a lot of clubs, aren't there? American Legion. We got all these clubs that want the businesses in town to join, and the businesses in town that need to join are the car dealerships. That's a perfect match for them. But if you've got to pay money to belong to these clubs all the time, then wouldn't you think, let's make a sales opportunity out of this. Let's network that, and let's keep track as a company who we send before they go. You're going to lunch today? What's your objective? What do I need you to do? What do you want? What do we need you to do for the company while you're doing that? Now, we don't want to necessarily put you on a mission that's outside your comfort zone, but what little pieces of information could you bring back? They will bring back none. So anything you bring back over none is a plus, right? So bringing back some information is an important piece that we want to do. That's part of networking. Now, there are networking clubs that are only for networking. Chamber of Commerce might be an example where that's predominantly a networking club. They wouldn't like us to call it that, but it's a community service mostly for the members to help them get to know each other. So that when I have a thing that I need, oh, I know him. Because, when you think about it, that's why Robert J. DeBry advertises as much as he does. Because if he knew how to reach me when I needed him, he wouldn't need to buy an ad. He'd just reach me when I needed him. But it's personal injury. Nobody ever knows when they're going to be injured. And when you are injured, they want a name to pop in your head. That's mortuaries are the same way, oddly enough. They have to be top of mind. They can't, they can't go, they call them ambulance chasers if they knock on your door going, hey, I heard your wife just died. What are you going to do? Do you need, you cannot do that. It has to go top of mind, right? So I'm bereaved and I know I've got a problem and now I need to take the initiative. So their advertising pays off now because I remember who they are and what their promises were and what they advertise. So network relationship is part of that. If I had networked with Ted Spilsbury, and I did, he took this class. When my wife died 3 years ago, I called Ted. Why? Because we'd networked. I was in a pickle. I needed somebody that understood and I trusted. I don't know why I trusted him. He's a student. I trust Brad. I don't know why. You're my student. So far you haven't talked with him. Right? That's better than some others, right? And so we build relationships. We always don't know why. That familiarity. If by the time this class is over, you'll spend $500 with me or whatever it is. So we'll know each other a little bit, and we'll build some level of familiarity. Same with any club you belong to. That Corvette club you talk about, Stephen Wade's all over that. But talk about failure. I bought one not long ago, 2 years ago. Got it in January. You got to order those a long time ahead of time. I wanted to buy it from Stephen Wade. And I offered to pay them whatever the going rate was over sticker price, which right now is about $40,000 over sticker. And I was okay because I liked the car. And I told the salesman. I went over to the Mercedes and talked to the guy that I like over there, salesman. Told him the same thing. Went to a guy that used to sell cars for Stephen Wade, that now owns Premier. I went to Ron, I told him the same thing. 3 people in town said, I'm willing to buy a car for over sticker, a lot over sticker. And nobody follows up on that. Why is that? They're not working the relationships. So I bought it from another relationship that Larry knew. And I'd rather bought it from in town. How many times do we not have the relationship tight enough, or we don't follow up on relationships, that we lose opportunities? And I'm not saying that about me. That's about failure to build and maintain relationships or network properly. Or I had half the network, but they didn't keep up their half of that. They should have either said no, which is fine. I have no issues with saying no. But don't say yes and then not deliver. Don't say yes and not come up with anything, not even a choice. Not just forgot about it. And not 1, not 2, not 3. Forgot about it. Never even said, hey, I saw you driving down the boulevard and you got a new vet. Why did you get it? I mean, it didn't trigger anything. People I know, they've got my phone number. And so how come? What's broken in our relationship capture? What's going wrong? And if I want to have competitive edge, it seems like all I need to do is set up a relationship capture, right? Where I'm working relationship. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start. Most of you probably have already done this. Certainly on the one side you have done it. But we're going to start the conversation of how do you build a network. And it has immediate purport if you're looking for a job, and my purpose for talking about it isn't to suggest any of you look for a job. Y'all know you can when you need to and when you want to and all of that. But this is about the people that are professional associates of ours. Who has your job at your primary competitor? Who are you scouting at your competitor that you'd like to hire if you had a chance? How many cabinet shops are in town? There were 23 in 2008. About half of them have come back.
Probably 85 now.
There may be 85 now, but business is good. I hadn't really followed through on that or thought that through. You're right. Lots of cabinet shops.
Last year I had about 98 customers, and pretty much 99% of them were cabinet shops.
Wow. So, somewhere in this town, we got guys that are real good with woodworking. A lot of them. Who would you hire at Loudon? Do you have a list? I'm not saying you have to. I'm just saying I want to have a prospect list of who my next customers are going to be, and I'd also like to be recruiting who I'd like to hire. All is fair in love and war. Let me address the ethics of that just a little bit. In my career, I've been recruited 4 times where somebody called me out of the clear blue and said, "We want to hire you. What do we need to do?" I was in Washington Dulles Airport in a payphone, the box one time when I took one of the calls. I was in New York City another time when I took the call. People, and I'm not saying that for any reason other than when you recruit somebody, the relationship is different than when they come begging for a job to you. When you recruit somebody, they will never forget that you reached out to them and wanted them. The level of performance going in the door, they're going to give you their very best because you recruited them. You had confidence in them, you're building, you have a desire to hire them, you've picked them out of all the people that you could have picked out, and you've reached out to them and said, let's talk about a job. You don't have to offer a job sight unseen. You know people's reputation, you can say, hey, I've been looking at your work. It looks better than the others. How do you do that? Let them talk to you. Talk about their work. And then eventually say, you're one of the guys I want to hire. I don't have an opening right now, but I want to hire you. And let's keep in touch. Keep in touch. Let them know. I don't have an opening yet, but I want to hire you. And keep in touch. And you'd be surprised. One of those will work out someday. And one of those will pay you back because you've got a list of people that you've chosen, not people that when I'm down, I need a CNC operator bad, or I don't make the shipment. That's not the time to start your recruiting list. The time to start your recruiting list is before you need one, right? And so, I hope that the Bears know who the next quarterback's going to be, and the one after that, because I hope that when one gets his knees broke, that they got another one that's ready to come off the bench and play at the professional level. I need the same thing in my business. So the networking is kind of how that starts to happen. The place network happens. I'm going to expose my networking and admit to you I don't network anymore because I don't care. I don't mean that in a frivolous way. I keep trying to retire, and I don't. So I don't. My LinkedIn is not up to date. I passed out a thing on LinkedIn. Y'all got that. I want to talk about LinkedIn for a minute because one of your assignments is I want each of you to have a LinkedIn account, and I want you to show it to us. And I'm going to show you mine. And I have, the assignment is, some of you have them and some of you don't. How many of you already have a LinkedIn account? Ish, a third of us do, and some don't. And if you have some reason that you are against information on the internet, and for that reason you don't want to go there, trust me, they already know your name, phone number, and address, but I respect your position on that. I don't have an issue on that. If you have a preference not to do that, I totally respect that and will not require anybody to do that. But we are given an incredible way to network that we didn't used to have. And we can network in a lot of ways, and you never know what they are, how they're going to come up or what they're going to do. Everybody got one of those? Okay. So what I would suggest on your networking, I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, we all have Facebook. I don't use Facebook. I rarely post up on Facebook. The picture I got on there is a picture of me and some kittens 100 years ago. And that's a bad idea. Don't do that. I only did it because I don't care. I don't post to Facebook. But don't underscore or underestimate Facebook. When you apply for anything, the first thing they're going to do is check your Facebook page and your other social sites. And if you're looking for somebody, the first thing you want to do is check theirs. So as we start to broaden our base, have a presence if you want. If you want to stay competitive, have
So
a
you can't
presence
talk
on
crap
there.
on the president all day?
I'm sorry?
I can't talk crap on the president all day? Is that a bad idea?
Sure you can, but you might need 2 Facebook pages, which they don't really go for.
Okay.
But middle names look good as a last name sometimes, so you can do 2 if you go around it that way.
I don't think the president of the company
be aware
United
that,
States.
one of the things that we do at the college when you interview for a job here, in the interview process, we say, have you seen our webpage? And sometimes it's yes, sometimes it's no, but whichever way it is, pull it up. I want to show you where our policies are at, where our rules are at, and so forth. And they will ask you to like our page right then. As soon as you do that, we have access to your Facebook. Okay? And so I don't know if that's ethical or not. I'm just telling you what the college does. And they're not wrong. As soon as you like somebody, that opens a gate in electronic searching to some degree that wasn't open to that person before. So even if there's privacy settings, sometimes that will penetrate them. And so that's just a heads up. But it's a tool you can use they can pull up your web page and like you, and then that may give you access to see how bad you're ragging on the president or whatever. And so be careful, especially on Facebook. That's where your friends tend to post up photos of you, drunk and disorderly or whatever happens, and the worst possible photo of you. And you can't control what other people post on
Oh, I do.
social media.
You can
You need to teach me how to do
I'll
that.
show you.
All right? So that's something
You
that,
can't tag
that I'm not telling you to have a Facebook page. I'm saying that is a part of our networking. You can have job history and some other things on Facebook. You can also, for very little effort, have a web page. This is stevecarwell.com. The chances are good you can have your name.com for a few bucks a year to have the ISP. Throw a web page up there that tells about you if you want to do that. I'm not telling about me much on that web page. I've had contacts, quite a few from that web page, and I'm not even looking for them. They're just there. It's just under search engine optimization. The people that have good crawlers find it, find what I'm looking, because I'm doing no advertising at all for consulting work or anything like that. But LinkedIn is the one we're talking about. Same with LinkedIn for me. I'm not doing any marketing. Here's on my LinkedIn page. This is Ram at Lockheed Martin. Brian is the president of Intergalactic, which is Ram's spin-off company here in town, and that'll be interesting to watch that. But I don't even have the current right name of the college on there, Dixie Applied Technology College. That's how long it's been since I've updated my LinkedIn, because I'm not looking for business on LinkedIn. But it's not good to have it completely outdated. I should update that page, and I haven't done it in a long time. But LinkedIn can be the way you can reach out. If you know the name of your competitor, you can look up their company and see all the officers and all the members that are on LinkedIn that work for that company. The handout that we have here will show you how to do some of that and how you can use LinkedIn as a database for networking and other companies that or maybe other skills that you're looking for are discoverable on LinkedIn. And when we're recruiting and looking for players, I would much rather find the candidates than have the candidates try to find me, because I can pick and choose who I want to follow up with. I can pick and choose people that maybe there's some great skills of guys that live in Cedar City that I could connect to and find out that they really live in St. George and they got a job in Cedar they hate and they love to not drive the Black Ridge every day. And so finding those people, and LinkedIn gives us a platform to do that. So what I'm going to do is update my LinkedIn presence, and you always have a lot of gibberish. You don't control most of the stuff that goes on here. These are postings for people that you know. There are 500 people in my first, these are people I legitimately know. Facebook, I don't know most of those people. I have no idea who they are and how they got on my Facebook page. LinkedIn, you have a little more control over who you invite or accept as your circle of people. And the fact that you can search by company. If I want to know something like Dean Foods, I can look up Dean Foods, and here's pages after pages after pages of people that work for Dean Foods. It says, Bryce Scott's Army veteran. I can connect with him here. He's at Dean Foods. Well, Dean doesn't exist anymore, right? So he hasn't updated his page either, right? Or maybe he would if I looked up Dairy Farmers of America. it's on the DFA, okay. Well, 6 of my connections work there, but there's pages, there's 100 pages of people that work at Dairy Farmers of America. And if I wanted to, poach one of them, that's how I touch base with them, right? I can send a message to, no matter where they live, I can send a message to them. They'll choose to respond or not. It's their call. But it's a great way to network and say, hey, I've got the same job you've got. I'm in St. George. What's it like there? What's the labor force? Just an innocuous conversation. You establish a connection with somebody who does what you do. Yes.
I feel like we've gotten scammed through there pretty bad because we're all listed like with our job titles, and we've had people, I can't figure out how else this would have happened, but email me and make an email address that looks like it's coming from my dad, and then ask me for every person's W-2 from the last year. And luckily I was like, I'm not sending that to you, to my dad. And he's like, just send it now, like being really bossy with me, knowing that he was my boss. And I refused, and then all of a sudden I looked at the email actual address that it came from, because it had his name, and it was.
I think our life has gotten that way. We have to really, really
That's the
look.
only way I can figure out that happened.
I got a phone call the last couple of days from, I carried 2 phones. Unfortunately, the phone call came from my other phone.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
I know I didn't make that call, and it's like, but it was a scam asking for some information, and we have to watch for that. Do Google things about LinkedIn if you're going to use it as a tool. My suggestion is take on the assignment, if you are okay with the concept of starting a page for you on LinkedIn with the total purpose of building a net. You're not looking for a job. You're not looking for recruits at this moment. You're establishing a presence. And from that presence, you'll look at how to use LinkedIn for marketing, how to use it for recruiting. You can Google those, and you'll see a lot of things from LinkedIn and from other people. And scams are out there. They certainly are out there. And be careful and be prudent about that. Thank you for bringing that. But it's still a useful tool that we can use to help broaden our base when we're in a spot to do that. There's information on here that is probably, I've met Ed. He is in Kansas City, and he's the guy. And of course, Ken and I are friends. And this information is accurate, at least what I'm seeing on there. And that's because they came up first, because they're in my direct. You have a level 1, or a level 2 link, or a level 3 link. So, Kevin, who was it? Movie star, said that there's 6 degrees of separation. Did anybody read that book? Everybody's connected to everybody in the world by 6 degrees. So I know Luke knows Andrew knows Larry knows, so on. And 6 people were connected to the President of the United States. Because I know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody in Washington that knows somebody that knows the President. We're 6 degrees of separation from everybody in the world. The math tells us. So on LinkedIn, I've got, those are first degree, those are people I know personally. And then all the people that they know personally are linked to me second degree, which means if I want to talk to them or contact them, if somebody's on Ken's list and I want to talk to them, I can call Ken or message Ken and say, hey, I want to reach so-and-so, could you reach out to them? He's on your list, people you know. And he either will or won't. It's his call. And kind of depends on your relationship. This is about relationship building, right? And if you've got a good relationship, they'll do you a favor and give you a cell phone number or whatever to help you connect when you need to connect with somebody. You might ask why. You might want to know what's up because that's his friend. He doesn't want to, he doesn't want to rat out his friend if I'm the cops, but he knows me. He knows I'm not. He knows that I won't abuse it. So he'll probably tell him he's going to have Steve call him. So that's how LinkedIn can be a tool if I'm looking for something. If you're looking for a specialist that knows how to, line a tank, with Teflon, that's an art that everybody in St. George doesn't have. And the people who say they can spray it probably can't to food grade that Luke's going to need. So this is a place you could reach out and find who's qualified to do that. Call another send a message to somebody you know at the Nestle plant, say, who does your Teflon coating? And they might say, we do it in-house, or they might say, oh, here's the name of the guy who does it for us. Now you know who does it for your major competitor. Maybe you'd use them, maybe not, but that goes in your database, right? That's part of your network, so that you now have another contact that you can build this thing as part of your professional portfolio. Now, is this the company's or mine? Right now, the court says your LinkedIn account is yours. And so it's up to you if you share it with your company. And I don't. I work for myself and for Dixie and my company and other companies that hire me, and I want them to know I don't share that with everybody.
A lot of that help is personal anyway. It's
Yeah,
like
like those pictures at Lake Powell.
Yeah.
You know, that's yeah, for sure.
well, like the first time I met you is when I borrowed that $10,000 program from you,
Yeah.
which gave me actually 2 more people that said, hey, we want to talk to you. But there was one person that gave me your information that says, hey, this is the guy to talk to. So,
Yeah.
I mean, he did it as a favor,
Yeah.
but, you know, he could have said, hey, no, I'm going to be part of that, or,
Yeah.
you know, you need to talk
And
about
see, that's interesting how those things happen. It becomes an important part of our relationship just from a chance from somebody else's network.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that all of you can tell stories like that. Our lives are intricately woven, and you know what, some people say it's divine, and some people say it's circumstance, and some people say it's the yin and yang of, you know, whatever your belief set is. Our lives are intricately intertwined, and we have an opportunity through networking to make the most of that. And I think that's cool. So my commitment is in the next couple weeks I'm going to update this to make it more current. And if you haven't started one, I'm recommending that you do. If you have one up, revisit it and say how much of this is personal. And I would separate Facebook for personal stuff and LinkedIn for professional stuff. That's kind of how I've done it. I've tried not to let any personal stuff pop up on LinkedIn. It's hard to control that, but for the most part, I've tried to be successful in that. And Facebook is a crapshoot. You know, I just basically, personally, I don't post to it, but Facebook, the Instagram people say Facebook's out anyway, and the TikTok people say it's all out. But I'm not recommending that you network through TikTok. It's a good business model for some, but this class isn't going to touch on that one. I don't know it well enough to say how you can use it for business. If you're a budding artist, it can put you on the charts. I get that. I understand that. But I don't know if you're, you know, what your business is. You know, if you're going to do a bed and breakfast, you know, those tools can be very important for that. You can reach countries that we don't reach well here, and it's a value to do that. All right, that's enough of that. I want to go back to problem solving now with a couple of things. The PowerPoint that you have, I am not going to go through it. It's 104 slides. It would take us the class to do these 104 slides, and I'm not going to do that, but I'm going to tell you where they come from. When I was hired by Toyota, it was not in Georgetown, Kentucky. They were just in the process of bringing that plant to the next levels. It's a Camry manufacturing facility. They make 500,000 cars a year now. It's the largest automotive manufacturing plant in the world. And it's Toyota has 17 manufacturing plants in the United States. So it's the first of those and the biggest of those. And they make 2 brands of cars there, 2 models of cars there. They're starting to do some EV stuff. They haven't polished that off. And they make 2 engines there that don't go in those 2 cars that they make there. Some of them do, but they go into other platforms as well. So they actually make more engines than they make cars. They make about 600,000 engines a year. And some of those go into the cars that they make there, and some of the engines come from somewhere else, which isn't very neat when you think about it that way, but that is what Toyota is doing. So as I visited that facility for the first time, one of the purposes was for them to train me in what their system was and what I needed to know about it in order to help second-tier manufacturers that were selling products to Toyota. That was the contract that I was on. And so they contracted with the University of Kentucky to learn their system from their senseis, and they pretty much, as you read these PowerPoints, if you choose to do that, and if you have the Japanese language in your back of your head, you will see that a lot of these slides aren't even written in Kentucky. They're written in Japanese English. They're written by Toyota experts. And this is the program that Toyota uses to teach, to onboard all of their employees in time that work at that plant. They have a lot of employees that work at that plant, 9,000 I think. And this is how they solve problems. And this is what this was not designed to be a program for the public. University of Kentucky will put people through for a high price, because Toyota doesn't really want them to. Toyota is most concerned that their people know this stuff, and it's delivered through the training model at University of Kentucky, which is Georgetown, which is where this plant is at, is straight north on I-75 from Lexington. So if you kind of know Kentucky, go straight north on 75, about halfway to Cincinnati. And I think it's poetic justice that I-75 is what goes through Detroit. And I think that's kind of cool that Toyota has done such a good job right off of I-75, where Detroit had a chance to own it. So we could go through slide after slide of this. These are the 8-step problem-solving process, starting out with the guiding principles. Before you learn the steps, you have to learn the rules. And the guiding principles are the rules, the kind of the culture guides. The customer is first. Everything comes from the customer, and if you're not sure who the customer is, it's the next person in your process. Whatever you're doing, that's the customer. And so everything is for that. What is the purpose of your work? What is the piece that you're doing? That's one of the guiding principles. You own it. And that's a guiding principle of problem solving. And they make it visible if they can. They want everything to be visual. They want everybody to look at the assembly line and know how it's going. So I could go through this, all 104 slides. If you're interested in how Toyota teaches problem solving, look at it. And if you want more on it, let me know, and I can give you more on it. Right now I'm going to look at a synopsis that is 10 minutes long in video form, because some of you would rather see the video. And this is from a third party. This is not done by Toyota. It's done by one of the training firms in Lean and Toyota manufacturing process.
Steve, is that PowerPoint up on Canvas for some reason?
It will be on Canvas. It may not be yet, but it will be.
Wait, did we learn how to get on Canvas? Because I must have missed that.
Did Sheila come in and teach us how to get on Canvas? The answer is no.
I thought we didn't have a Canvas yet.
We have
We're
not
still
had
waiting for
Canvas
it to
yet,
get
but
done.
we've got it. I talked to Alyssa just before she left. I've got all the videos up on YouTube, and I've got the link from IT, and they have said they're putting it on Canvas. So I haven't seen it myself, but Canvas is up. I put a bunch of stuff on Canvas. So thank you for asking that question. Tuesday, we will have some instruction on how to get on Canvas. My gosh, I'm sorry about that. I'm glad whoever brought that up.
It was first semester that they taught us how to get on Canvas, I think. Where she came out in our class and showed everyone.
Well, apparently we need to do it again. So,
It says first semester.
We're second last semester.
Hi there, my name is Ron Pereira, and I'd like to officially welcome you to this first overview module of the Gemba Academy Practical Problem Solving course. Now, by the end of this module, you'll know what a problem is, as well as why companies such as Toyota use a form of practical problem solving to this very day in order to improve their way of working. Next, you'll also be introduced to other problem solving approaches, such as the Six Sigma DMAIC methodology. And finally, by the end of this module, you'll know what the 8 steps to practical problem solving are as we prepare to take a deep dive into each step throughout the rest of this course. Okay, well, let's get started by first answering a fundamental question. What is a problem? Well, first of all, a problem can be defined as any deviation from the standard. Now, it can also be defined as a gap between actual and desired conditions. And finally, a problem can be defined as an unfulfilled customer need. Now, taking it a bit further, we're often able to classify problems into one of three types. The first is when the standard is not achieved. In other words, if our target is 100% on-time delivery and we experience a month of 82% on-time delivery, our actual performance doesn't meet the standard. Now, the second type of problem occurs when the standard is achieved, but a higher standard is now required. Well, staying with the on-time delivery example, if we're currently performing at 100% on-time delivery at a quoted lead time of 2 weeks, our customers may very well ask us to reduce our lead time to 1 week while still maintaining 100% on-time delivery. And finally, the third type of problem occurs when our performance to the standard varies, meaning it's not consistently achieved. Now, this is actually a form of mirror up or unevenness, which we first learned about in the Transforming Your Value Streams course. All right, well, now that we've been introduced to what a problem is, let's turn our attention to why practical problem solving is such a powerful approach to tackling issues burdening you and your organization. First of all, practical problem solving enables organizations to have a common understanding and definition of what a problem actually is, which in turn creates a fast and urgent initial response. Next, a standard problem-solving approach removes time lost in debate and discussion. In other words, organizations are able to focus their valuable time and energy on things that actually matter, such as solving problems. Finally, thorough planning, root cause analysis, and the implementation of mistake proofing ensures problems don't reoccur, since there's nothing more disheartening than to see a problem reappear a few months after it was thought to be solved. Now then, throughout this problem-solving course, we'll be referring to the PDCA cycle, which stands for Plan, Do, Check, and Act. And in particular, we'll be spending a lot of time on the first step, which is plan. Since the failure to plan properly, as shown on the top side of this diagram, almost always results in longer times to resolve the problem. In other words, this organization rushed through the planning phase only to pay for this hastiness in the check and act phases. And on the other hand, when an organization takes the time to do slow, thorough planning as prescribed in a practical problem-solving approach, they're far more likely to solve their problems faster and far more efficiently, as we see here. All right, so those are some of the reasons why practical problem-solving is so powerful. Now, I'd like to turn our focus towards a few of the other problem-solving approaches used today by companies before we take a deeper dive into the 8-step practical problem-solving roadmap. Well, first of all, depending on a problem at hand, many companies utilize one of the simplest problem-solving methodologies available today, known as just do it. In other words, for small problems that may not require much time or resources, it's sometimes possible to quickly fix them and then move on. Now, these might be likened to so-called low-hanging fruit initiatives. Next, Ford Motor Company adopted a problem-solving process known as the 8 disciplines, which takes 8 disciplines and uses them to tackle engineering problems. Now, some actually confuse 8D with the 8 steps of practical problem solving. And while they do share some similarities, they are different. Another extremely powerful problem-solving approach finds its roots in a Six Sigma methodology. Specifically, Six Sigma practitioners around the world have used the DMAIC, or define, measure, analyze, improve, and control process to attack problems associated with variation and defects for many years. Now, as an aside, Gemba Academy plans to offer Six Sigma training in 2010. Now, to be sure, there are other problem-solving methods used today, but these are some of the most popular. Okay, well, to wrap up this overview module, I'd like to officially introduce you to the 8-step practical problem-solving process. Now, throughout the rest of this course, where we'll follow an actual case study, we'll be taking a deep dive into each step. But for now, we just want you to become familiar with their names. Now, I'd also like to point out that these 8 steps are based closely on what Toyota calls the Toyota business practice, which is essentially a detailed explanation of how the PDCA cycle works. All right, so let's get started. Now, the first step in the process has us clarifying the problem. In other words, we must clearly describe the current situation while going to see with our own eyes in order to get the facts. Now, we also want to answer questions such as whether we've contained the problem in order to protect the customer, even if this means implementing a temporary solution. And the second step of the process has us breaking the big vague problem down into smaller, more specific problems. Again, we want to go see the actual problem, process, or situation with our own eyes. Now, during this step, we'll also take time to study the various inputs and outputs of the process, helping us to properly scope and prioritize our efforts. Next, once we've scoped the problem, it's time to set a target that we will achieve, which is step 3. Now, this is an important step as it forces us to make a commitment. Now, this target should definitely be a challenge, but also something that helps limit the scope. In other words, it becomes a must-do target. Finally, it's important to remember that this target should take us one step towards the ideal, meaning it doesn't have to be a gargantuan leap towards perfection. Instead, we'll focus on taking one solid step at a time. Next, step 4 has us analyzing the root cause. Once again, to do this, we must practice Genshi Genbutsu without prejudice, which means we must go and see the problems for ourselves instead of relying on what a report says. Now, during this step, we'll work to find points of cause, which is the starting point of root cause analysis. Now, as it turns out, there are often multiple points of cause, so we must drill down using things like the 5 why. And for the record, 5 is not a magic number. It's just a typical number suggested to get to the root cause. Now then, a proper root cause analysis will point to the action needed, namely the removal of the root cause. To do this, you and your team will need to make a plan that includes who, what, and when, enabling you to pursue multiple countermeasures, which is step 5 of the practical problem-solving process. Now, step 6 has us seeing the countermeasures through as we implement our countermeasures quickly as a team. To accomplish this, it's important to seek the help and, most importantly, the ideas of many people. You'll also want to communicate the status regularly while turning the PDCA cycle again and again. And perhaps the best advice we can offer with this step is to never give up. You'll no doubt hit obstacles and challenges, but your willingness to persevere and battle through these situations may very well mean the difference between success and failure. Now, step 7 is often called the follow-up phase, as we evaluate both the results and the process. Now, during this step, you'll want to ask the questions, was this an effective countermeasure or just luck? Since, if you look closely at this picture of the famous square peg in a round hole example, sometimes even great ideas, such as ensuring only round pegs get inserted, have room for improvement, since a person with a square peg and a hammer just might find ways around this error-proof device. Finally, step 8 of the practical problem-solving method challenges us to standardize success using something the Japanese call yokoten, which, loosely translated, means to copy and expand good Kaizen ideas to other areas while also identifying unresolved issues. And in addition to building on successes, we must also face and learn from unresolved issues. In fact, we should never shy away from these challenges, as failure to address them could lead to problems reoccurring in the near future. And finally, during this 8th and final step, we must set the next targets for improvement, since the phrase, "no problem is a problem," is so very true. And that covers the...
All right, I've got one more that I want to show. It's 9 minutes, and I don't want to pause too long on this. In the PowerPoint for this, there are 3 examples, real-world examples that Toyota used as part of their training at this point, and these are the 2 production floor examples and 1 office example that were real problems that are sustaining problems at Toyota. They keep rearing their heads in different forms. One of them is what they call interior mutilation. And they have robots that are putting a lot of these parts together, and they're looking at seat parts and interior parts, consoles and so forth that are scuffed up or mashed up or something by the robot, or scratched or scuffed in some way, but it's a quality problem. And so that's one of the problems that they address in your PowerPoint. They also have one that was there was the last time I was there, which has been quite a while. They were fighting this hard. It was water leaks in their cars, and I thought, water leaks in your cars? That's crazy. Well, of course, you don't want it. If it was in St. George last night raining, you don't want your car to leak. And so they put the cars, every one of them, coming off the line, they put it through an extreme rainstorm. And they don't want it to leak into the car, and they don't want it to leak out of the car. They want the car to be leak free. So they put they pressurize the interior with smoke, and look for smoke coming out. There's places where it's supposed to come out, right? And so it's supposed to come out in certain places, but there are places not supposed to come out. And the water leak, they were having 3 places that the water leaks were coming from. One was the tail lights, which is like, wow, I wouldn't have thought tail lights would be collecting water and leaking water out, or water leaking into the tail lights. But that was actually at the time that was their number one problem. And that, you can what's the root cause of that? It went back to the manufacturer, not an assembly problem. But you'll see that being talked about. And they also had, I think about 20% of their paychecks at that point in time were being manually cut. And when you've got 9,000 paychecks to cut, that's a way high number. Why are that many checks having to be manually written? So they Pareto charted it, come up with the primary causes. You'll see that mapped out in the PowerPoint. So actual physical problems on the production floor like we deal with every day, and office problems like we deal with every day are both looked at using this methodology. So I think it's worth digging into it to see what you can learn on that. And I'll help you or share, we can talk about that. I want us to look at the guy that we listened to about the marshmallow challenge, talking about toast, and this is 9 minutes. We'll get us right out on time. This is Tom Wojak. Is it raining again?
Yeah.
I hope my taillights don't leak. I don't have a Toyota. So Tom is talking about wicked problems and problem solving in making toast. And so we'll use this as an example. We'll watch this, and I think he's bringing something that we can apply to the Toyota methodology as well. And I want you to think about it. He's the one that told us to start with the marshmallow and work backwards. We've got another video we're going to see on Tuesday about a guy from the CIA that was on the team that was looking for Osama bin Laden. And he talks about working the problem backwards. And we're going to listen to him too. I'm very impressed with him. Wish I had a chance to really visit with him. I've never met him. So let's listen to Tom.
Some years ago, I stumbled across a simple design exercise that helps people understand and solve complex problems. And like many of these design exercises, it kind of seems trivial at first, but under deep inspection, it turns out that it reveals unexpected truths about the way that we collaborate and make sense of things. The exercise has 3 parts and begins with something that we all know how to do, which is how to make toast. It begins with a clean sheet of paper, a felt marker, and without using any words, you begin to draw how to make toast. And most people draw something like this. They draw a loaf of bread, which is sliced, they put it into a toaster. The toaster is then deposited for some time. It pops up, and then voila, after 2 minutes, toast and happiness. Now, over the years, I've collected many hundreds of drawings of these toasts, and some of them are very good because they really illustrate the toast-making process quite clearly. And then there are some that are, well, not so good. They really suck, actually, because you don't know what they're trying to say. Under close inspection, some reveal some aspects of toast making while hiding others. So there's some that's all about the toast, right? And there's all about the transformation of toast. And there's others that are all about the toaster, okay? And the engineers love to draw the mechanics of this. And then there are others that are about people. You know, it's about visualizing the experience that people have. And then there are others that are about the supply chain of making toast that goes all the way back to the store. It goes through the supply chain networks of teleportation and all the way back to the field and wheat. And that one actually goes all the way back to the Big Bang. So it's crazy stuff. But I think it's obvious that even though these drawings are really wildly different, they share a common quality. And I'm wondering if you can see it. Do you see it? What's common about these? So most drawings have nodes and links. So nodes represent the tangible objects like the toaster and people, and links represent the connections between the nodes. And it's the combination of links and nodes that produces a full systems model. It makes our private mental models visible about how we think something works. So that's the value of these things. And what's interesting about these systems models is how they reveal our various points of view. So for example, Americans make toast with a toaster. That seems obvious. Whereas many Europeans make toast with a frying pan, of course. And many students make toast with a fire. I don't really understand this. A lot of MBA students do this. So you can measure the complexity by counting the number of nodes, and the average illustration has between 4 and 8 nodes. Less than that, the drawing seems trivial, but it's quick to understand. And more than 13, the drawing produces a feeling of map shock. It's too complex. So the sweet spot is between 5 and 13. So if you want to communicate something visually, have between 5 and 13 nodes in your diagram. So though we may not be skilled at drawing, the point is that we intuitively know how to break down complex things into simple things and then bring them back together again. So this brings us to our second part of the exercise, which is how to make toast, but now with sticky notes or with cards. So what happens then? Well, with cards, most people tend to draw clearer, more detailed, and more logical notes. You can see the step-by-step analysis that takes place. And as they build up their model, they move their nodes around, kind of rearranging them like Lego blocks. Now, though this might seem trivial, it's actually really important. This rapid iteration of expressing and then reflecting and analyzing is really the only way in which we get clarity. It's the essence of the design process. And system theorists do tell us that the ease with which we can change a representation correlates to our willingness to improve the model. So sticky note systems are not only more fluid, they generally produce way more nodes than static drawings. The drawings are much richer. And this brings us to our third part of the exercise, which is to draw how to make toast, but this time in a group. So what happens then? Well, here's what happens. It starts out messy, and then it gets really messy, and then it gets messier. But as people refine the models, the best nodes become more prominent, and with each iteration, the model becomes clearer, and because people build on top of each other's ideas. What emerges is a unified systems model that integrates the diversity of everyone's individual points of view. And so that's a really different outcome from what usually happens in meetings, isn't it? So these drawings can contain 20 or more nodes, but participants don't feel map shock because they participate in the building of their models themselves. Now, what's also really interesting that the groups spontaneously mix and add additional layers of organization to it. To deal with contradictions, for example, they add branching patterns and parallel patterns. Oh, by the way, if they do it in complete silence, they do it much better and much more quickly. Really interesting. Talking gets in the way. So here's some key lessons that can emerge from this. First, drawing helps us understand the situations as systems with nodes and the relationships. Movable cards produce better systems models because we iterate much more fluidly. And then the group notes produce the most comprehensive models because we synthesize several points of view. So that's interesting. When people work together under the right circumstances, group models are much better than individual models. And so this approach works really great for drawing how to make toast. But what if you wanted to draw something more relevant or pressing, like your organizational vision, or customer experience, or long-term sustainability? There's a visual revolution that's taking place as more organizations are addressing their wicked problems by collaboratively drawing them out. And I'm convinced that those who see their world as movable nodes and links really have an edge. And the practice is really pretty simple. You start with a question, you collect the nodes, you refine the nodes, you do it over again, you refine and refine and refine, and the patterns emerge. and the group gets clarity, and you answer the question. So this simple act of visualizing and doing it over and over again produces some really remarkable outcomes. What's really important to know is that it's the conversations that are the important aspects, not just the models themselves. And these visual frames of reference can grow to several hundreds or even thousands of nodes. So one example is from an organization called Rodale, a publishing company. They lost a bunch of money one year, and their executive team for 3 days visualized their entire practice. And what's interesting is that after visualizing the entire business, systems upon systems, they reclaimed $50 million of revenue, and they also moved from a D rating to an A rating from their customers. Why? Because there's alignment from the executive team. So I'm now on a mission to help organizations solve their wicked problems by using collaborative visualization. And on a site that I've produced called drawtoast.com, I've collected a bunch of the really, I think, best practices. And so you can learn how to run a workshop here. You can learn more about the visual language and the structure of links and nodes that you can apply to general problem solving, and download examples of various templates for unpacking the thorny problems that we all face in our organizations. So the seemingly trivial design exercise of drawing toast helps us get clear, engaged, and aligned. So next time you're confronted with an interesting challenge, remember what design has to teach us. Make your ideas visible, tangible, and consequential. It's simple, it's fun, it's powerful, and I believe it's an idea worth celebrating.
All right, we are officially down to 20 seconds. We'll call it at this. I think that he has something to say, and I'd like to see your break room, and I'd like to see there be papers like that. Did you see that company? I mean, maybe that's an extreme. It took them 3 days to do that, but that's only 3 days. And their executive team did some cool stuff with that. Couldn't we do it in our department? Just do it in the break room. But, you know, fill one wall and say, this is a wall for how we cut wood parts, or this is a wall for how we install an awning, and put it up there. And then look at what's put up there. We did that at Ram Company on one of their processes, and they worked on it in 2-3 weeks. And it kept changing and changing and changing because they discovered things they were doing they didn't know they were doing. And go, why are we doing that? Why don't we do this? Why? And it kept evolving, and yours will too. You know, when you actually capture what you're doing, you've been through this process just barely, and you've discovered a bunch
I've
of
still got
stuff.
them all over my office.
It's
They're
unbelievable.
still on the wall.
That's good. That's, well, it should. I mean, that's a reminder of what you're doing, where you're going, and why it's there, and it's an opportunity to say, what were we thinking about that? Do we really need that? You know, and it's cool. It's cool to talk about. I'm glad to hear that. It's past time. Get out of here, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Tuesday, and we'll get everybody signed up to Canvas on that Tuesday. Get hooked up with the videos and all that stuff. Be safe out there. It's hydroplaning weather. We don't know how to drive in ice or water.